I should have seen it coming, but I didn't. Looking back, the signs were all there. The distance, the half-hearted conversations, the way Betsy had started dressing up more often. But I was too absorbed in my own little world, a world that revolved around beer, baseball, and the occasional belch. That night, the night that turned my life upside down, started like any other. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, a bottle of beer in hand, zoning out while the baseball game played on the TV. The couch sagged beneath me, a familiar comfort after a long day at work. Betsy had gone upstairs after dinner. I hadn't thought much of it, assuming she was probably cleaning up or checking emails or something equally mundane. In my head, everything was fine. Then the doorbell rang. I groaned. Another distraction. "Harvey," she called from upstairs. "Can you get that?" "Sure," I replied, not exactly eager but not annoyed enough to argue. I placed the beer down, already slightly irritated at having to move from my spot. I walked over and opened the door, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. That's when I saw him. A man I had never seen before, clean-shaven, dressed to the nines in a well-tailored suit, stood in front of me. There was something about the way he looked at me, a kind of calm confidence that made me feel like an afterthought. He wasn't selling anything. I could tell that much. I took in his neatly combed hair, the polished shoes, and something in my gut told me that this was not just a friendly visit. "Yes?" I asked half-heartedly, trying to keep it casual. "Can I help you?" He smiled politely. "I'm here to pick up Betsy," he said. "We have a date." For a moment I thought I misheard him. I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" My voice sounded distant in my own ears. He didn't flinch. "We have a date," he repeated, and this time the words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, frozen. I didn't even know how to react. A part of me wanted to laugh, to call it some kind of ridiculous mistake. But the way he stood there, calm and collected, told me that this was no mistake. I glanced up the stairs, hoping Betsy would come down, tell me this was all some kind of sick joke. Instead, her voice floated down, carefree and casual. "Tell him I'll be right down." I felt my mouth go dry. "You have a date with my wife?" I turned to him, the anger rising in my chest. My fists clenched reflexively, but I didn't move. I didn't know what to do. "Yes," he said simply, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I wanted to punch him. I wanted to scream, but all I could manage was a strangled, "I'll call her." I turned away, my mind reeling, and walked to the foot of the stairs. "Betsy," I called, my voice more steady than I felt, "your date's here." I expected her to come down, wide-eyed, denying everything. I expected her to tell me it was some mistake, maybe that this guy was just an old friend, someone she hadn't seen in years, but instead, Betsy appeared at the top of the stairs, dressed in a short, tight black dress I hadn't seen in years. Her hair was curled, her makeup perfect. She looked stunning, like the Betsy I had first fallen in love with all those years ago, but she wasn't dressed for me. "What the hell is going on?" I asked, my voice low but trembling with barely controlled rage. "Married women don't go on dates with other men. You're my wife." She didn't even hesitate. "I'm tired, Harvey. Tired of this routine we've fallen into. You come home, drink beer, watch sports, and I'm just... there. I don't exist to you anymore." I opened my mouth to argue, to defend myself, but the truth was I had no idea what to say. I didn't see this coming. She kept talking, her words hitting me harder than any punch could. "I want more," she said. "I need more. And if you're not going to give it to me, I'll find someone who will." The stranger was still standing there, his eyes on us, calm, watching. Betsy jabbed her finger into my chest hard. "Don't wait up for me. I might not be back until morning." With that, she turned, walked past me, and out the door. I stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe, watching her climb into his car and drive away. Hours passed, though they felt like minutes. I didn't move from where I stood by the front door, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it all. Betsy had left with another man. My wife had gone on a date right in front of me, and I had let her. I couldn't even wrap my head around it. I replayed the scene in my head over and over. Her coldness, the way she looked at me like I was nothing. Had it always been this way and I just never noticed? Eventually, the shock wore off. and the anger settled in. How could she do this to me? To us? We had been together for so long. We had built a life together, raised 2 kids together. And now she was throwing it all away for what? A night of excitement? Was that what I had become to her? A boring husband who couldn't give her what she needed anymore? I couldn't stay in that house. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, suffocating me with the memories of everything we had shared. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and walked out to my truck. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to get out. I drove for hours, not knowing where I was going, not caring. The radio played in the background, but I wasn't listening. My mind was too full of the what-ifs. What if I had paid more attention to her? What if I had done more? Could I have stopped this? Eventually, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a small motel on the edge of town. It was dingy, the kind of place where you go when you don't want to be found. I checked in without saying much, tossed my wallet on the bed, and collapsed into the chair in the corner of the room. The room smelled like cigarettes and cheap cleaning products, but I didn't care. I was numb. I stared at the ceiling, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning, my mind replaying everything. The anger grew with every passing hour, feeding off the betrayal. By the time morning came, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to be the fool anymore. If Betsy wanted to throw our life away, fine. I'd help her do it. When I walked into the office the next morning, Barbara, my secretary, gave me a puzzled look. "Harvey, you okay? You look like hell." "I'm taking the day off," I said, my voice flat and emotionless. "I've got some personal things to handle." She raised an eyebrow but didn't press. "All right, anything I can do to help?" "Who handles the medical insurance paperwork?" I asked, leaning on her desk. "That would be Sylvia in HR." "Why?" I didn't answer her, just nodded and walked down the hall to HR. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I wasn't going to let Betsy win. Not this time. If she wanted to throw me away, I'd make sure she understood the consequences. It didn't take long to get everything in motion. I removed her from my medical insurance, cancelled the automatic payments for our life insurance, and changed the beneficiary to our daughters. I wanted her to know that I was done. I wasn't going to wait around while she figured out if she still wanted me in her life. The next day passed in a blur. I went through the motions at work, but my mind was somewhere else. The only thing that kept me going was the thought that I was in control now. I had taken action. Betsy couldn't just waltz back into my life like nothing had happened. That evening, when I got home, the house was quiet, too quiet. Betsy hadn't come back. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or furious. Maybe she really had stayed out all night. Maybe she was with him, laughing at how she'd gotten away with it. My fists clenched at the thought. I grabbed a bottle of bourbon from the kitchen and poured myself a glass. The alcohol burned as it went down, but I didn't care. I needed something to numb the pain. A few hours later, I heard the sound of the front door opening. I looked up, and there she was, standing in the doorway like nothing had happened. "Where the hell have you been?" I asked, my voice slurred from the alcohol. Betsy didn't answer right away. She looked at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Regret? It didn't matter. She walked past me and sat down on the couch, her hands folded in her lap. "I drove around for a while," she said finally. "Then I came back. I didn't want to stay out." "Why? Didn't your date go well?" "It wasn't a date, Harvey," she said softly. "It was just a wake-up call for both of us." I laughed bitterly. "A wake-up call? Is that what you're calling it now? I thought if I did something drastic it would shake things up, get you to notice me again." "Well, congratulations, Betsy. You've certainly got my attention now." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the tension between us thick and suffocating. Finally, Betsy stood up. "I'm sorry, Harvey," she said quietly. "I didn't mean for things to get this bad." "Yeah, well, it's too late for that now." She nodded, her face pale. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight." The days that followed were tense, to say the least. Betsy stayed in the guest room and we barely spoke to each other. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was the betrayal. I didn't know how to move past it, or if I even wanted to. A week later, the phone rang. It was our life insurance agent, Larry. He wanted to confirm the changes I had made to the policy. "Are you sure about this, Harvey?" Larry asked, his voice hesitant. "You've taken Betsy off the policy completely." "I'm sure," I replied, my voice cold and detached. "All right," Larry said, "I'll process the changes." After that call, it felt like there was no going back. I had severed ties with Betsy in more ways than one. She was no longer a part of my life, at least not in the way she used to be. The thought should have brought me some comfort, but instead, all I felt was emptiness. Weeks turned into months, and I kept pushing forward, determined not to let Betsy's betrayal define me. I threw myself into work, into rebuilding my life without her. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the memories. They haunted me, gnawing at the edges of my mind, reminding me of what I had lost. And then one day I came home to find a letter on the kitchen table. It was from a lawyer, Betsy's lawyer. I opened it with shaking hands, my heart pounding in my chest. Divorce papers. I stared at the words, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. This was it. This was really happening. Betsy was divorcing me. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, paperwork, and bitter arguments. We fought over everything: money, the house, even the custody of our grown children. It was ugly, and it tore me apart. But eventually, the divorce was finalized. Betsy moved out, and I was left alone in the house we had once shared. It felt like the end of an era, like the final chapter of a story that had gone horribly wrong. Years have passed since that night. I've moved on, or at least I've tried to. I've built a new life for myself, a life without Betsy. But every now and then I find myself thinking about her, wondering where things went wrong. Was it my fault? Could I have done something differently? Or was this always how it was going to end? I don't have the answers. All I know is that life goes on, even after the worst kind of betrayal. And I've learned to live with that. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Do like, share the video, and subscribe the channel. Thanks.